Hello and welcome to our junior church lesson for this week. Last week we were looking into the book of Ezra I meant to say. And Ezra had a really important part as far as helping them to be able to rebuild the temple. The church, you can kind of assume and safely say, and they were able to finish rebuilding the church. But now we're going to shift a little bit. We're going to go into another aspect of this time period. And we're shifting more closely to the Jewish folks. More into the Jewish folks, where we're talking about a lady whose name was Esther. Esther would be extremely important in this story here. This is the young lady who no one ever thought that would be even the queen. But how does she become a queen? Well, during the Medo-Persian Empire, there were many kings and stuff who came along. And as we've seen from the last few weeks, they have had no issues, the Babylonians or the Medo-Persians, they have had no issues in trying to get the Jewish people to be involved. There's been no secret about that. But Ahasuerus, he was the king at this point. He had married a wife named Vashti, and he had a really good empire. He had a great empire, actually, and things were pretty good. Until he had a party one night. He had a big feast. 7 days in which this feast came. Vashti had the same thing for the women of the castle, the palace, I guess you could say. And Ahasuerus wanted to get Vashti to come out, perform, do things, and basically show off herself in a sense. And Vashti didn't want to do that. She didn't want to be used as a prop. She didn't want to be used as a way to just woo other people and stuff like that. And the king was very upset by this. He had personally asked for his queen to come out and to entertain. And Vashti said no, she didn't want to do that. So then they asked, well, what shall we do with the queen Vashti? Esther chapter 1, verse 15, according to the law, because she had not performed at the commandment of King Ahasuerus by the chamberlains. And they're thinking, well, if she does this and she rebels against her husband, she goes against her husband's wishes, all these other women are going to do, and we're going to have a big problem on our hands, king. What are you going to do? So this is what you should do. You should not allow her to come back again. And she didn't. Vashti went to her own place, never saw the king anymore. You could essentially say they got divorced in a sense. And then the king got lonely. And he wanted to find a new queen. He had remembered what Vashti done, but again, he felt empty, felt lonely. So what they decided to do is they decided to find young ladies who could perform before the king, and whichever one would be acceptable to the king would then marry. So they gathered all of these ladies together. Verse 5 of Esther chapter 2, Shushan, the palace, there was a certain Jew whose name was Mordecai, the son of Jair, son of Shimei, son of Kish, a Benjamite. That's important to know. There's some really well-known family members in his family tree. They'd be carried away by Nebuchadnezzar. And he had brought up a young lady who was his niece named Esther, Hadassah. Her father and mother had passed away early, and Mordecai thought, this might be a way to help us out as the Jewish people. So he thought, well, maybe we could see if Esther could at least give it a shot. So Esther gave it a shot. And she pleased him. She obtained kindness of him. Many things were doing good. In verse 10, Esther had not shown her people nor her kindred, for Mordecai had charged that she should not show it. Basically said, hey, keep it under wraps, and if you get selected, then we'll tell the people. So they came through. All these things were going on here. The women were trying to please this king here. And Esther comes along, and it's her turn. And it says at the end of Esther chapter 2, verse 15, Esther obtained favor in the sight of all them that looked upon her. So Esther was taken into King Ahasuerus, into his royal house royal, in the 10th month, which is the 10th month in the Tebeth, in the 7th year of his reign. The king loved Esther above all women, and she obtained grace and favor in the sight more than all of the virgins, so that he set the royal crown upon her head and made her queen instead of Vashti. Wow. Young lady doesn't know who her father and mother have gone on, being raised by her uncle. And then, in a moment like this, Mordecai says, hey, why don't you try it out? See if you can get chosen. Doesn't hurt to give it a shot. Not only did she get chosen, she got married to the guy, became new queen. So we have a Jewish lady becomes queen of an entire empire. And even what's more about this is that right at the very end of this chapter here, and this is where we're going to finish, is that they had a gathering together, but there were two people who were in the king's house, one of his leaders, and they tried to find a way to get rid of the king. They wanted to get rid of the king, and Mordecai knew about it. So Mordecai told it to Esther. Esther told it to the king, and sure enough, they were found out, and they weren't living no more. The king got rid of them. But what do we learn from this story here as it unfolds and as it progresses? Well, we learn this. We learn, number one, unfortunately, that sometimes people try to make people do things to try to please others. And that's not exactly how we as believers ought to go. We ought not to try to do things to please people. Ahasuerus wanted to please people. Vashti did not. And it cost her marriage and her queenship. But Vashti felt that it wasn't right for her to do that. So that's what we learn from there. But number two, and what we're going to see, this is going to be pivotal, is that God has a plan. God was going to be able to use Esther to be able to do something great. Because when we come back the next time, we're going to see that not everybody accepted the Jewish people. And there was a certain man in particular who did not. And because of that, there would be a lot of chaos that's going to take place because of it. We thank you for joining us this time, and hope that you'll join again next week when we look at the man named Haman and his plot to try to get rid of the Jewish people.